Oh my gosh, we're doing it. Sierra, Jacob, thank you for coming today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah.
This is going to be wild times. As I was saying, this is the maiden voyage of the triple in the studio. So we're going to see how it goes. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to come out. You obviously both work for Fish and Game. You're in a sector of research that is really relevant to all the development, obviously, within Idaho, because we're developing like crazy. Migration corridors are getting pinched off. In fact, the neighborhood we're sitting in up on the ridge, the southern ridge, kind of in a little valley, that actually is a winter rangeland for elk. So like, I used to be able to look out my second story window and see elk in the wintertime wandering around up there. And as the houses have been built out, that migration pattern has had to change. Like, it's a real problem for those animals that were, forever and ever coming up through this valley and moving through in the wintertime. So talk to me about what you do for Fish and Game and what you're doing with development, collecting data and migration patterns.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll start. I work as a program coordinator on big game habitat and migration related issues. The department has a lot of people that work on these issues as far as that go out and do captures and collect data. Sierra and I are fortunate enough to get to use that in an applied sense. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today, and I'll let Sierra talk about what she does.
Yeah, and then Jacob's my boss. So I am.
So I have to be here. Thank you.
And so similar, I work on big game habitat, migration and movement work. I'm based out of Pocatello, but get to work across the state. And really what I've been doing for the last couple of years is working with regional wildlife managers and biologists to help them get good projects for big game on the ground. So working with Jacob and the regions. And so a lot of that has centered around cheatgrass treatments, sagebrush plantings, fence removals, and we'll talk about a bunch of that stuff today too as it pertains to migration. But it's really rewarding to get to work with a bunch of great people on a bunch of great projects that benefit big game.
When you talk about cheatgrass treatment, is that specifically with migration? Is that the essentially idea that, like, look, these animals are moving for a myriad of reasons. One could be safety, one could be environment, temperatures, right? One could be food and nutrients, right? So if they're going into an area that classically has had high quality nutrients, that they're like, okay, look, we just got to get down there and there's like, the best buffet ever in the world. Then they get there and it's really like Sizzler and all fried food. They're like, this is not what we're looking for. Is that the nature of kind of trying to address the cheatgrass problem?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. So cheatgrass, a really recent study just came out of Wyoming that actually kind of quantified the impact of cheatgrass to mule deer. They were focused on mule deer, but it showed that at 10 to 14% coverage of cheatgrass in an area, mule deer use started to really decline. And once that cover reached 20%, they almost completely avoided the area. So there's definitely this response that ungulates have to degraded ranges where they'll avoid in search of higher quality forage elsewhere. And so that cheatgrass, it's a whole nother topic, the impacts of cheatgrass. Departed fire regimes is one we see every single year right down here in southern Idaho. So a lot of these sagebrush steppe areas should burn 80 to 100 years, 50 to 100 years, depending on what elevation they're at. Now we're seeing, fires every couple of years. You guys just had the Valley Fire. Was that 2 years ago now that burned a bunch of winter range of a migration we'll talk about today. And so that's a huge issue. But then, just the removal of forage and thermal cover for deer, pronghorn elk. A lot of these ungulates depend on fat reserves to get them through the winter. And that's again, a whole nother topic, nutritional condition and, they have to come into winter with a certain body fat to make it to survive. And so these long-term, cascading effects of reduced forage quality can be pretty substantial on ungulates. So cheatgrass is a huge concern. Idaho's just seen a tremendous expansion of it, and it's moving up in elevation. I mean, it is a winter range problem by and large, but we're seeing more of it encroaching on summer ranges now as well.
Could I ask, when you talk about like cascading concern, right? This is like a lot of times when like if I stub my toe, I got about 2 seconds. Then I'm like, ow, that really hurts. You know, because you have that period of time where you stub your toe and you're like, this is going to suck in about 3 seconds. And you're like, oh, there it is. Like there's a lot of pain. But there are problems that come from wildlife, migration, habitats, you know, destruction, all these things that take years to really start hammering home. It's like, okay, it might be bad in the first year. It's not that damaging, but it's like it starts taking down animals' resilience, removing their fat reserves, you know, like all of these different things, decreasing, you know, the amount of, you know, breeding that's actually going on. And then ultimately, it's like 5 years down the line, they're like, okay, now we're in a crisis because this thing happened a few years ago. Is that like an accurate representation of what happens?
Yeah, I would say on the landscape, that's an accurate representation, right? It takes time for the effects of landscape scale change to be realized, and it's incremental and slow, and so that's why it can kind of creep up on you, especially if you're not watching for it. So
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's one of those things that happens slowly over time. The phrase you hear very often is "a death of a thousand cuts."
Yeah,
and cheatgrass and habitat change is one of those cuts. Yeah,
gotcha.
Yep.
So all of these things into account, talk to me about the data you guys are collecting and why it's important to collect. Because this is, you know, as a layperson, and, you know, I've gone hunting before, but I also don't know all the nuances of like why we should care about all these individual different data sets. So like, what is the data you're collecting? Why is it super relevant?
Yeah, so I'll just to clarify for those that are listening what we're talking about today. So we'll use a couple of terms interchangeably. We'll talk about big game. We'll refer to them as ungulates. When we use those two terms for the sake of today's conversation, we're talking about pronghorn, we're talking about moose, we're talking about elk, and we're talking about mule deer. So those are the four main species that kind of fall under the umbrella of migration that we're going to talk about today. And those are the ones that we have the most data for and I'd say best understanding of from a migratory standpoint. Not that we don't have really robust data sets for things like bighorn sheep. That's just kind of a whole different animal. And so, so just some terms for everybody out there so that they know. And then I think the other thing that is that we'll just go ahead and touch on is that you guys kind of already mentioned is why the reality of big game migration in Idaho is important for Idahoans. So it's pretty obvious to pretty much everybody that works for the department or everybody that lives in Idaho, like wildlife is a important part of the cultural fabric of the state, right? Like it's interesting when I started working for the department, you know, you'd stop and get gas in your state truck, right? Now all of our state vehicles have a logo on the side. So you know immediately whoever's driving that truck works for Idaho Fish and Game. And the amount of people that come up and talk to you and ask questions, they're very engaging, the public is. And it just shows that people really value the resource that's here. And so why migration? Like why this topic? Why is this important? And it's because if you think about kind of an hourglass, we're going to talk about the pinch point of the hourglass today. So one end of the hourglass would be where animals are in the summer, which we'll refer to as summer range. And that typically can be a broader area. And then to move from summer range to winter range, we're beginning to understand that they have routes that they take. And in some areas, these routes are very refined and very specific and very narrow in places because of either natural features or anthropogenic change to the landscape over time. And then once they get to winter ranges typically are not as broadly distributed as summer ranges, but there again, there's room to kind of spread out. And so we're talking about that when we talk about migration, just kind of think of the pinch point of the hourglass. And that's why it's important, because if we maintain the ability for animals to move across the landscape and access important seasonal habitats, then that gives us the best chance of maintaining, you know, robust populations of big game. That we really currently enjoy. And hopefully in some instances, you know, we're talking about maybe, you know, having some population recovery for some things like pronghorn.
Gotcha.
Yep.
So essentially it's the idea, and again, I know this is kind of a ridiculous example, but like if you look at the I-5 corridor in my former state, going from Northern California to Southern California, like I drove that a gajillion times going to see, cousins that lived down in Southern California, or going to Disneyland, or, jiu-jitsu tournaments, whatever it was. It didn't matter, right? But that was the main corridor. Like I think you can go on Highway 101 on the coast, but it's just like long, winding. It's very scenic, and I've heard people really enjoy it and stuff. It's also terrifying because there are like cliffs and stuff at different places, like landslides. But the I-5 corridor, if you're trying to get from north to south, that's it. If the I-5 corridor, just like a giant boulder came down and knocked it out, you would not, like the entire state transit system would come to a halt. Like you wouldn't be able to move produce, you wouldn't be able to move people, you wouldn't be able to move anything. So that's kind of the hourglass nature, where it's like you got a giant population north, you got a giant population south. And if they got to get there, man, there's only one way they're going.
In some instances, yes, there is one way they're going, and it can be, hundreds of yards wide in small portions of that route. And in other places, it's much more diffuse.
Sure.
So it kind of runs the gamut. But yeah, that's a good example.
Yeah, and then you had like the Grapevine. You guys ever been on the Grapevine? That's pretty. So like you go up through, you got to go like up over a range, and it's like there's one carve out in the range. So it's like you're on I-5, it's flat forever, and then all of a sudden it's like you start going up, and it's like you're in this giant canyon. Yeah. You always get speeding tickets because coming down you're going really fast, and they're just waiting for you to. It's like bastards. Yeah. Anyway, all right, man, keep going. I don't want to interrupt you. Like that was just a clarification question.
No, that's good. So I think Sierra has a good background in. She did her master's on elk in Idaho, and so I think I would be interested to kind of hear her perspective on the whys, like why are animals making this huge movement, which comes at an energetic cost.
Right.
Yeah. So
where'd you do your master's?
I did it at University of Idaho.
University
under
of U of
Dr. Ryan Long.
Go Vandals.
Yep.
Is Ryan Long, was he in the Department of Natural Resources or
yes.
what? Gotcha.
Wildlife Resources.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I just had Dean Becker on from Natural Resources. He was fantastic. I always screw up Natural Resources because I forget it accounts for so many different things, which are like I can't even wrap my head around timber. And then there's like, no, you got to add water in there, and like they kind of touch on minerals a little bit. Don't forget the wildlife. I'm like, stop, like it's over. Anyway, all right. So U of I, keep going.
Yeah. So, my work focused a lot on nutritional condition of elk and how it relates to pregnancy rates, so population growth rates of elk. But a lot of those, a lot of what we found and what past researchers, this is not a new field, right? The John and Rachel Cook did a ton of work on this throughout Oregon and Washington and the Yellowstone area. And so it's not necessarily new information that what the importance of summer and fall nutrition for, as ungulates, as Jacob defined, these deer, elk, pronghorn. Pronghorn are kind of a different breed of animal when it comes to how they get through the year with body fat reserves. But for elk, what's really interesting is if a cow goes into the winter, so comes out of the fall and into the winter, and she has at least 12% body fat, which I think for the average, female woman, we're sitting around 22, 24% is like a healthy, just to put that into perspective, you know.
So they're already really lean.
They're just really lean. Right. Yeah. And, so if she goes in with 12% body fat, there's a good chance she's going to survive, and there's a good chance she's going to have her calf in June. And there's also a pretty good chance that she'll be able to lactate effectively enough to raise that calf into recruitment, barring any predation or other causes of mortality. It doesn't take a huge drop in body fat for all of that to change. So when you drop just 3% to 9% body fat, now it's starting to get a little iffy if she'll have a calf. She'll probably survive the winter, but it's less likely that you're going to get a calf out of her. And if you do, there's chances that calf's going to be smaller. She's not going to have quite as much nutrition to give it through lactation. So you see, to your point of cascading effects, you don't see it right away, but you end up with a smaller calf, and then that calf's disadvantaged for the rest of its life, potentially. So long-term, like maternal effects, they call it. And then once you hit 6% body fat, she's not going to probably have a calf, and she may not even survive at that point. And the reason for that is that over the course of the winter, it's pretty common for a cow elk to drop to 5 to 2% body fat. So if they're starting at 6, they're ending at 0, and 0 is fatal, right? So the importance of good quality nutrition, not just like high quality forage, but enough of it. So a lot of food and then good food. And the ability to access that through migration is really, really important. So a lot of our animals winter, down. A lot of the ones we'll talk about today are going to winter down in more of that lower elevation, drier sagebrush habitat. A lot of that is to get away from deep snow, because energy expenditures on winter range are really important too, to prevent, burning through that fat too fast. And then they migrate up. You mentioned it in the first, when Nick was on here, Matt, the riding the green wave. So following this nutritional plane up into the higher elevation, mountains, the Boise and the Soldiers and the Sawtooths and the Little Lost and the Lemhis and all of these mountain valleys that we have. So,
and that's as the snow melts away, spring comes, and they're like, hey man, there's greener grass right there, let's go there. And then there's greener grass right there, let's go there.
Right, exactly. Gotcha. And we can touch on it too. And then if we can show the maps later for those that can actually see this on YouTube, there's stopover locations. And these are kind of like the equivalent of gas stations, I would say, for like people, if you relate it to a road trip.
Sure.
These stopover locations tend to be areas with really good food, or security cover from just disturbance. And so they'll spend more time in these little gas station areas as they travel between their summer and winter ranges.
And may I ask a question? Excuse me, the reason they don't just go south and stay going south, at least in part, is because they have to, there's a dance they have to do between harsh environments that they can survive, but things coming after them can't necessarily survive, right? Like people have been telling me, they're like, look, man, the moose in particular in the United States, specifically in the West, are kind of in a bad spot because they have, like, all of these animals have parasites like ticks and, whatever. And the moose can survive a hard freeze, but the parasites can't, right? So the moose, part of their life cycle and their survival mechanism is staying where it gets really, really cold. So these parasites get knocked out and they're like, oh, finally. And then they can go into the spring, kind of like a clean bill of health, right? So they can't just move south and stay in the perpetually warmer environment because that will propagate parasites on them and they will eventually die from that. So like, I got to flirt with as harsh a winter as I can personally handle to make sure that the things that I don't want around me or on me, can't outcompete me. Mm-hmm. Is that like an accurate, or at least part of the reason why they stay in harsher environments?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. The other thing that there's a beauty in harsh environments, and that is once they become less harsh, like in the summer,
sure,
they're like in the West, they're very lush, right? So yes, there is an advantage, and they have evolved with a system of severe winters that keeps the parasite load at a manageable level for them, but also kind of concurrent with that is with a harsh winter, although it is very taxing on them, comes a lush spring and better condition energetically, as far as food resources out there on the landscape for them the following year. So just like we talked about cumulative effects and everything, parasites are definitely a big component of that. They're a component of it. But there's a whole bunch of interactions that go on there with winter severity and severity that also manifests in just really beneficial habitat conditions for them later on in the year. Yeah.
What is it about a harsh winter that produces an extraordinary spring? Like why is it uniquely lush once the snow clears?
Well, I'm going to give you sometimes the best answers are elementary level answers. And the answer is, we're in the West and water is everything. And in that instance, it's because of the spring melt and the resulting soil moisture and the plant response. It's water.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So temperature is a component of that. And so you could have a really frigid winter with not a lot of moisture. That would kind of be that's not a great scenario. You want to have those two things in combination so that you get the benefit out of it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So bottom line is you have, at least from a nutritional and survival standpoint, it's like, listen, I need to be somewhere in the spring and summer and into the fall that has an incredible amount of nutrient load that I can collect and store on me. And then come the wintertime, I have to move into an area that perhaps has slightly less, though harsh, conditions for a number of reasons. But I also have a probability of having some like stopover nutrients along the way. So it's like it's not going to be so deep that I have to dig down. Like I could still be able to access things. It's not quite as cold, and that's going to be my best chance to survive. If I'm a gal and I'm trying to have a little baby calf, it's like, okay, that's my best chance to survive and have my calf survive.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yeah, they're kind of the inverse of humans in the fact that, during the holidays, we're eating cookies and we're kind of, it's cold outside and whatever. And so we're gaining weight in the winter. Whereas for, the Idaho's big game, summer is when you've got to gain your weight because winter is about, losing it slowly or maintenance.
Yeah.
And there's a few maybe outlier instances in the state where in late winter you get these spring green up events where weight can be put on. But for the most part, yeah, that's kind of the trajectory of it is. They're not worried about looking good in a bathing suit in the summer. It's all about like being fit. And for an animal, being fit's just for the most part being as big as you can be so that you can get carried over through the winter with the reserves you've got on you.
Dude, they are just tough as nails. Like,
oh yeah,
it's really. I got really into distance running a while back, and I try to get as much information from people as possible. So like, I briefly hired like a running coach. He was this big Ironman triathlete, and I was chatting with him about just training and stuff because. Like I went out and did this half Ironman, no training at all. I'm like, whatever, man, like full send. He's like, it's wild what you can actually do. And I was chatting with him about that in general. He's like, listen, the wild thing is it only takes a pound of fat for you to run an entire marathon. He was like, so think about how many pounds of fat you have. That's how many marathons you actually have the energy to run right now. Like you have it all stored up. He's like, the problem is your ligaments and your joints aren't conditioned enough to actually be able to handle that wear and tear. So like I had when I was training for a marathon, I had actually injured my Achilles tendon. I'm like, this doesn't make sense. Like I have the will to keep running. I just can't keep running. He's like, yeah, man, because you can get to that point. And I eventually did like this 30-mile like mountain, two peak run. And it was like nothing happened. So I was like, we can be hard as nails. We just don't do that to ourselves, right? But like we could pack on weight and survive a freezing winter and like run away from wild animals. Or just like, I like my heater. Like I don't want to do that to myself. Yeah. Anyway, so you have these migratory patterns that are multi-use, right? So nutrition, safety, all kinds of things, and they come down to these choke points.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So one of the things we thought would be interesting, especially, I'm a YouTube guy. I tend to, spend a little time on YouTube. We thought it would be interesting for everybody if we just kind of walk through like how we even get our hands on the animals to start, right? And so we brought some visual aids today, so the YouTube audience will get
let's see it.
We'll get to enjoy that. So Sierra will walk us through this. The first thing that we're going to go, we've checked this. This is unloaded, but we brought a dart gun. This is an older dart gun, so we've got some.
Hold that up right there. Yeah.
We've got some more modern dart guns that we use now, but this is the one people were willing to kind of let us borrow for the day. This is kind of a active time of year for dart guns. We do most of the capture activities in the winter, and then there's also the occasional animal that gets itself into a place where it needs to be moved. It also requires the use of the dart gun. So yeah, we brought that to start with, and Sierra will kind of walk us through. She has a lot of capture experience, and so she can kind of walk us through what it takes to actually get to the point where we can talk about this data, because there's a lot that goes into it on the front end.
Yeah.
You do a lot of shooting out of helicopters?
I've gotten to do it once.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
We've got much better gunners on the team than me. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, we've got about 3 folks that do the majority of our gunning out of the helicopter. We do a little bit of contracting too. So we have some companies that bring their crew and we contract some work out, but Idaho is unique. Compared to some other states where we are still the ones doing the capture, the biologists and the managers and
Gotcha.
So that's really, yeah.
So Matt, we have a beard length requirement for the guys that are hanging out the side.
Probably has too much hair too.
Fortunately, I don't.
Yeah, that's right. Most of those guys are short on the top, long in the front. But
I know the look. I know the look.
and you think about it. So I mean, today is a cooler day, right?
Yeah,
There's a little bit of snow out on the ground, but a lot of the days that these guys and folks are in the helicopter and hanging out of the helicopter to either net gun or dart gun, it's probably 20 degrees for a high that day, and then you're moving along, 50 miles an hour at the slowest, hanging out the side of a helicopter. It's very cold, and the net gun is all metal, so that's just freezing to your hands. So it's a taxing task. But yeah, I wanted to get the beard thing in there because with those three individuals, and they know who they are that do that work. I think it's a point of pride too. It kind of looks a little bit like a unicorn mane. It's got a sheen to it. So, anyways, that's enough on
Dude,
that.
I can't grow a beard. I'm Mexican. Like, I can grow a mustache in an afternoon. Like, full on boom, right? I can't get, like, if the beard comes in all splotchy, like, I just don't have the genes in me for it. Like, how many Mexicans do you see walking around with, like, a big old beard, right? Like, it's not a thing. Anyway, whatever, in another life. Anyway, I'm sorry, keep going.
You might let a mustache go.
My gosh.
You might pass.
Are you guys, oh my God, neither of you live in Caldwell, do you?
No.
Okay, there gave out an award at the Caldwell Fire Department, or it was like the fire district, can't remember which one, and they have the best mustache of the year award, and the guy who got it this year, his nickname's the Lorax, and I swear to God, this thing is like over his entire, he looks like a cartoon. I'm like, I need to meet that man. I can't have him on the show, his whiskers will get stuck in the microphone, but like, yeah, man, he's got a full thing.
That sounds impressive.
Yeah, it is. Anyway.
We used to have a guy on the crew, also knows who he is. I don't know if he'll hear this, but he was an auctioneer. And so he grew quite the handlebar mustache that was kind of part of the image. And he ended up getting it stuck in some hobbles when he was hobbling a deer or an elk. I can't remember which one it was. And the animal kicked and it pulled half of his mustache off. So
oh my God, that's like the scene from Mario Brothers when Bowser's pulling on Luigi's mustache. Like, that sounds terrible.
Yeah, it caused a lot of laughter in the helicopter, but not for him. So
that must be hell. My God.
Terrible.
R.I.P. mustache. Anyway, back to your dart gun.
Yeah, so we, a lot goes into planning a capture. As Jacob said, we do most of it in the winter. That's because animals are congregated more down on winter range. It's easier to catch them. There's some benefits to doing it in the winter. You got snow. Animals, it's easier to find them, but it's also a little bit easier on them. So we get a lot of concerns from the public about, hey, you're out there chasing animals around on winter range. And it's a very valid concern, right? Because we say, like, we need to give animals space. We need to let them rest. The data we get out of these capture efforts is worth the little bit of stress to them. This is super important data for us. And we also take really great care of trying to limit chase times to very short chases, 2 minutes. Our gunners are very effective at getting in and getting the animal, and we process them as quickly as we can and let them go. So none of us want to injure an animal. We hate to ever have a mortality on an animal that we're trying to catch. So if conditions aren't right, we've canceled captures in really hard winters where we just feel like animals are not in good enough condition to catch them. So there's a lot of thought that goes into just animal care. But we use a couple different ways to catch them. It's almost all out of the helicopter or using a helicopter in some way. So Jacob mentioned the net gun. That is like a canister that has a net in it that fits onto a gun. Basically, it takes a 308 charge, and there's weights on the net. And so when that charge goes off, it shoots the net out over the animal. It spreads that net out over the animal, and then someone gets out of the helicopter and gets on the animal and gets them hobbled and a blindfold on their eyes so that there's less stress. That's kind of the preferred way of catching them. The alternative is using the dart gun here. We use some pretty potent narcotics for anesthesia. They're dangerous drugs. So there's a few people in the department that can handle them. And the benefit of darting is that it's less like impactful in terms of like the animal's not running full speed and then getting caught. They kind of go down slowly and just lay down. You have to watch like body temperature and breathing rates and stuff with the drugs. But it's reversible. So that's the cool thing about darting, is that once you're done collaring the animal, there's a separate drug that you can wake them up with right away. And within 2 to 5 minutes, they're off, walking off and pretty with it.
So you give them a downer, then you give them an upper.
Yeah.
It's like Housewives from the 50s.
Yeah.
They give methamphetamines in the day, Valium at night.
Yep, exactly. And then we'll also do drive nets. So some listeners may have gotten to see a drive net or be a part of a drive net before. We do a lot of them over here in the Boise, on the Boise WMA and the Blacks Creek WMA Wildlife Management Area. We reserve those for mule deer. We used to drive net elk.
What's a drive net?
So it's basically you string up nets. You have to pick the right area to do it. So you're looking for kind of natural funnels in an area where there's like a big concentration of deer. And you set up these they're like 8-foot tall nets. You got sticks that hold them up. It's very, it's surprising that it works to me every time. But then the helicopter will chase the deer into the net. And then there's people that just run and jump on them. So it's kind of like misnetting deer is how we compare it. Like, yeah. So that's something you can catch a lot of deer in a short amount of time doing that.
And that style of wildlife movement is something like, that's how, what it's like the Clovis people, they would like run giant herds of things. They'd get them into a funnel, then they'd run them off a cliff and then go down and like collect whatever they wanted. Like that's a really common, or like at least, I don't want to say ancient, but like a very classic way of maneuvering animals.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the tactics are the same. It's just we have more technology available to us now, which
of course.
Sierra touched on, but we're very cognizant of animal welfare while we're doing this, right? There's a reverence that you have to have for, or at least an appreciation that like we're out here managing, Idaho's wildlife for the people of Idaho. And one of the things that we definitely emphasize while we're out there doing that is trying not to do any harm.
Right, because these animals are owned by the state. Right, like they are wild animals, but they belong to me, they belong to you, they belong to Sierra, like they belong to all of us. So, if you had like a bunch of cowboys out there who really didn't care, that's essentially like, I don't know, having like a state vehicle that you're just driving it like you stole it. It's like, hey man, like that doesn't belong to you, just be cool.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely an emphasis on animal welfare when we're out there. And I think most people know that, but if we can reassure anybody of that, like there's a lot of thought that goes into that when we're doing these types of operations. So then once we have the animal caught, now's the time that we have to, take measurements and maybe affix things. Oftentimes, if we're going to catch an animal, we're going to try to affix something to it to learn more about how it moves across the landscape and its seasonal requirements. And so Sierra's brought some of those collars that she'll talk about.
Quick question for you guys, and again, slightly unrelated to the collars, but related to the capture. So there is a herd of elk, I believe, that are hanging out in the Emmett area that I'm sure, I don't know if you guys are aware of what's going on, but they're like, hey man, this is not good. We got to move these elk. And they're talking about, I think it's like 70 elk or something. They're like talking about going out and shooting them. And they're like, we got to get these things, like they can't be here. And there are some people online like, why can't you guys just move them? Like move them. It's like tranquilize them and move them. But like, dude, for 70 to 100 animals, that would be such an epic process, right? Or at least that's what I was thinking. Like, first off, you got to get each of the animals down, right? Somehow. Then you got to pick them up, and these are gigantic animals, right? So you got to get them in a vehicle to transport them. Then you got to take them somewhere, and like one by one, you're going to do this. Let's say you get 2 in a truck, which would be wild. It's like, okay, but you're making like 50 trips. Like that's the nature of what would be involved in moving those, right?
Yeah, I think that, a lot of times, I mean, and I'm guilty of this too. It's pretty easy to maybe oversimplify that, right? So like we're used to passing on the highway semi-trailers full of, feeder calves, right? And it's like, well, why couldn't you just load up all the elk on there and move a semi-load of elk? And one, just the pure logistics of that and the animal welfare of doing that is complicated. Not to say that you can't do it, but it requires a lot of thought and planning.
Okay, has anybody ever done that? You would need a chute that you'd have to get them into. They'd have to stay in there. Like, you got a bunch of horns. Like, what is that something that people have ever accomplished? Like, load the semi-trailer full of like 30 elk that are pissed off and don't want to be there.
It's been done.
Who in Idaho? That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as familiar with it, but I mean, throughout the history of wildlife management, animals have been translocated to try to, bolster and restore populations. Right?
I thought they just pretty much had to do it one at a time. I didn't know there was the ability to move them like by the dozens.
It could be done more so than one at a time, but there's, the logistics is one part of it. The animal welfare is another part of it. The other part of it is where you're moving them to. Why are they currently not there? Is it suitable habitat?
Are they just going to return back to where you moved
Are they going to
them
return
from?
back?
They're like, bro, that's where my sandwich was. Like, I liked the grass over there. I'm going back.
Yep. And then the potential effect on the landscape, the people, and the other animals that are already in place where you would potentially move animals to. So you've got human wildlife interaction concerns. You don't want to create an interaction problem there when those can run the gamut, right? Sure. From agricultural to residential. And then also now, probably even more so than in the past, there's disease concerns, right? And there's a whole myriad of diseases depending on which species of big game you're talking about. But, that also comes into it. So there's a whole myriad of factors that have to go into when you're talking about, well, why don't you just put them in a truck and move them? Well, if it were just that simple, you would probably see that tactic used a little bit more often. But the reality is there's a whole lot of risk there, not only to those individual animals, but to other populations of animals as well.
And when you say disease concerns, that's okay. Like, the population of elk in Emmett might have a parasite or disease or something, and you move them, let's say 100 or 200 miles away to a different area, and they come into contact with other elk or ungulates that do not share that particular disease or parasite at that time. And now you've just transferred that into a healthy population. Is that kind of the idea?
Yes. Yep. In general terms, which I think is about as far as we want to take it, because that's a whole nother topic. And there's people that are way more versed in that than Sierra and I. But yes, those are the considerations.
Yeah, the disease episode, like, I'm really excited. I spoke with director Fredericks about doing an episode on diseases, chronic wasting disease and other parasites and whatnot. That is this X factor that it's kind of like, yeah, we can be upset about habitats, we can be upset about predation, and we can be upset about depredation, we can be upset about a bunch of things, and then we just have the X factor of like, the world is rough and sucks, and there are all of these tiny things trying to eat all of the things, and then random diseases, and anyway, it is what it is. Yeah. Back to your caller. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's a good conversation. So we just brought a couple of callers. There's a few other things, like hopefully on the horizon, where we'll be able to get away from some callers. So there's solar ear tags out there now where we can just put an ear tag in, which is great for things like mule deer bucks, who we have a really hard time collaring for any length of time, just because their necks swell when they, during the rut. And so we've tried some things. This is like an expansion collar here.
Gotcha.
So it's meant to, as that animal grows, it will pop out stitches and slowly expand to accommodate a bigger neck size. But even, bucks' necks can swell like 18 inches, 20 inches during the rut.
They can double.
Yeah.
In diameter.
Yeah. And so it's just really hard to put a collar on a buck for any length of time. But I thought it'd be interesting for folks. So moose collar compared to like the deer collar. So this was one put on.
That's gigantic.
Moose. Yeah.
What size is that? Like a 34-inch, circumference or something?
Probably about, huh? I don't even know the measurement.
That's gigantic. And it looks bigger than my pants. I'll tell you that much.
So we've got
huge animals.
styles.
Yeah.
They're all designed to try to limit rubbing. You know, people who are out and see a collared animal oftentimes call in and say, you know, hey, this collar looks really tight, or it's rubbed all the hair off. And it's really hard to get them to fit where there's no hair rubbing or anything like that on them. So a lot of times you will see that. Tends not to have too big of an impact on the animal that we know of, really. I mean, we've had animals collared for you know, some of the old permanent collars, 15 years, you know.
Wow.
An elk was collared, you know, when she was a yearling, and you look her up and she's 18 now and she still has the collar on.
And when you were talking about the solar ear tags, like that's literally like a tiny little solar sensor on it, or a solar panel to absorb energy and keep pinging out. For older, like a 20-year-old tag, like how is that driving, you know, juice? Do you guys have to go out and like shoot her and then switch out batteries or something?
That's a good clarification point. A lot of our collars are not lasting that long, so we don't have anything that's really lasting over probably like 3 to 4 years, and that's a long time for a collar to last. A lot of them, this one here has a programmable drop off, so we can set this to basically fall off the animal, and a lot of times we'll do that. They stay on for a year, the collar will fall off, that animal can go about its way, we can go collect the collar and get all the data off of it. A lot of the data is remotely uploading to biologist computers, so many of our collars are set to take a location every 4 hours, so we'll get about 6 locations every day. And then that will upload either every day, once a week. And so you can sit at your computer and you can see right where that animal has been since the last upload. So it's kind of crazy. I mean, even just 10, 12 years ago, we weren't using, these are called GPS collars. We were using something called VHF collars, and that was where biologists actually had to go out and listen. We would put fixed wing planes up to listen for animals. You had to like triangulate, get 3 different angles to see where the animal was, and you were like mapping their locations on a paper map essentially, or coming back and putting it into your computer. How far we've come already with GPS collars is pretty incredible. And now we can get, Jacob could speak to some of the, it's not exactly ungulates, but like some of the like smaller transmitters on ducks and golden eagles. Like it's incredible what fine scale data we can collect now on wildlife. But the solar ear tags are exciting. They have their limitations. So for animals like pronghorn, they'll probably work really well because pronghorn are kind of an open habitat species.
Sure.
It'll be getting the sun, the solar panel will charge. But for, you know, if an elk goes into deeper timber during the hot summer, you know, you might start to lose track of that animal because it will stop, you know, charging. So there's always like limitations to the technology, but it would be really nice to be able to put an ear tag in an animal instead of a collar.
And would that ear tag be permanent, or would it just drop off after a year as well, or something like that?
So the ones out there right now are permanent.
Gotcha.
Yeah, they're fixing in almost like a cattle ear tag. They have 2 attachment points, and so they'll stay in. We've had issues with some of the early models, like ripping out of an ear.
Gotcha.
So they can still come out, but it'll mostly be a permanent.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And again, theoretically less stress on the animal, less, you know, you're not rubbing all the hair off the neck or something, and you don't have to worry about like mass swelling or expansion of an ear, unless you have like cauliflower ear like I do. So there's that.
Yeah.
It's a good time. So once you guys get this data, you start collecting for, you know, anywhere from 1 to 3 years, depending on, you know, on average, depending on what that type of tag is. And this is where you're looking for. It's like, okay, where is the hourglass? Where are the stopover gas stations? Where's the hourglass? And how does this match up to what humans are doing, right? Like, are we knocking into the hourglass? Are we proposing to knock into the, like, where are we going? And like, how do we address that? Is that the idea?
Yeah. So what we'll do with the collar data, so the advent of the GPS collars, really what has facilitated, you know, our ability to begin to understand how animals use the landscape,
Got
you know, at the scale at which they're doing, which is hundreds of miles in some instances. And so, yeah, we take that data, there's time between points. And so, you know, rather than just assuming that the animal walked on a straight line between those 2 points, we do a little bit of a modeling process, which kind of produces for an individual animal the probability of where it was during the time between the points.
Sure.
And then we begin to overlay those individuals on top of each other. And if we've distributed the collars on animals across the population in a manner that's representative of their distribution on the landscape, then we're going to start to see, like, as we layer those individuals and we try to have, 25 or 30 of them distributed through the population, now we're starting to see, like, okay, here's how they're utilizing the landscape. Here's how they're moving from summer range to winter range and vice versa.
And that's why you see a lot of the data maps, they're straight lines, like a ton of straight lines going through, like all kinds of different ways. And you start to see that kind of funnel shape eventually kind of emerge. Is that the idea?
That is, yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And so those animals, there is a linearness to the movement, but
Sure.
it's what they're doing between those 2 points we don't really know. And that's why we model them the way that we do.
Sure.
So yeah, we take the GPS data, we run it through a modeling process, and we start layering individuals to produce something representative of the population, and then it results in a map. And we brought a couple of those that you can flash up on the screen if you'd like for the YouTube viewers, right? And so then we take these maps and they're by population, right? And so we'll walk through a couple of those just really quick, and then we'll talk about, like, in practice, like, what do we do with those?
Sure.
So one that's here close to town that Sierra's going to talk about would be of interest is the Boise River mule deer.
Yeah.
Hang on a sec. Look at me.
Yeah.
You got a giant hair hanging out the side of your head.
Do I?
Right hand, grab it. You see that, Sierra?
Dog
Did you see
hair.
that?
It's probably
Oh
one
my
of the
God,
three
you
dog
must
Am I
hairs.
good now?
Yeah, you're good now.
Man, almost
turned
could have gotten
up
in the beard length.
Yeah.
club.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Thank you for that.
Your wife is going to see. She's like, I have black hair. That was blonde.
Oh,
what
that's-
the hell? Oh my God. I'm sorry. Just trying to look out for you.
I appreciate that, Matt. I really do.
I'm sorry, Sierra. What were you saying?
Oh no,
Oh,
we
sorry.
were just talking about the Boise River.
Yeah,
mule
yeah,
deer.
there you
So
go.
everyone's backyard, one of the over here,
Yeah.
mule deer, one of the largest mule deer populations in the state. So yeah, they're one of those that makes a pretty long distance migration. I think the longest the individual with the longest migration in that of our collared animals was almost 100 miles. It's like 95-mile movement. So a lot of folks around Boise have probably seen deer from this population if they're up on Boise River Wildlife Management Area. So that's kind of that's a big melting pot of winter range for animals that come from several different summer ranges. So deer that winter there kind of spread out. Some of them summer up around like Moores Creek and Beaver Creek Summit. Others will head up over almost all the way to Loman. The farthest individuals end up in the Sawtooth over closer to Stanley and even down into the Soldiers. If you look at the map, one of them ends up at Jumbo Mountain, which is clear down close to Fairfield. So they're navigating, quite the terrain on that migration route. And they're probably one of the ones with maybe a little less anthropogenic cause disturbance on their migration route. However, they're towards their terminal winter range. This is where the Cervidae Peak a wildlife overpass was built on Highway 21. So a lot of folks have probably hopefully seen that, driven under it. Last winter, Fish and Game, we put up trail cameras to look and see how many deer were using that. It was over 1,000 deer that first year used that overpass. And it's reduced the vehicle collisions almost to nothing right there. I don't think they had a single collision in that area since that overpass has gone in for deer and elk. So that's a great success.
May I ask, and this is like real nuts and bolts question, but like, what's the cost of installing an overpass? Is it like $1 million?
I wish it was $1 million.
So it's like millions of dollars.
It's millions of dollars. So there's
many millions.
Many millions. Yeah, there's a lot that goes into, as far as surrounding topography and, if you're building overpass, if you're bridging between two land features, maybe that's going to influence the cost, right? Yeah, but they're millions of dollars. I think the days of the $5 million type projects for highway wildlife movement projects are kind of, they're slowly going into the rear view mirror, and now we're in the tens of millions probably to implement these projects now at a meaningful scale.
Right. Now, to be clear, these are things that last a long time, and they save lives. Because if you, like, I ran into a deer when I was like 30 on the freeway. I was going 70. It was night. Small deer jumped over the center divide, it smacked it right off like my right bumper. The deer went flying. The car was totaled. Thankfully, the airbags didn't deploy and all these things. But if I had been 5 feet further down the freeway, the animal would have come through the windshield at like 70 miles an hour. And I don't care how big or small the deer was, like it would have come through the windshield. It would have been really bad, right? So you have a certain degree. It's like, yeah, we could sit here and be like, wow, why are we going to spend this money on these deer? It's like, no, we're spending the money on humans because people will absolutely get into catastrophic accidents, even if you don't get in transpire from the actual initial impact, lose control of your vehicle, slam into other cars, like all kinds of problems where it's like, and again, distributed over a long enough period of time. Let's say the overpass lasts 100 years. So it's like $10 million. You're like, okay, $100,000 per year. How many lives are saved over that 100-year time frame, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, they are a significant investment, and they're not a solution for everywhere, right? It's a thing where, now that we have this information, it can certainly inform that type of a process. But there's a whole bunch of other factors that can go into that. And one of the big ones, which we're very aware of and appreciative of, is community involvement and how accepting the community is of that as a potential mitigative feature, sure. Right? And so there's some places where, yeah, it probably doesn't, maybe it doesn't make sense for the community that lives there or whatever, but maybe there's other places that it does. And we do know that in places where they have been constructed, where we've done the follow-up monitoring, so there has to be a fence associated with this. That's just, animals are not going to just willingly walk across an overpass. That's a weird thing to do. They would much rather, it feels much more natural to just stay on planet Earth and walk across the road. But when you start doing the effectiveness monitoring of these projects, we're talking about from fence end to fence end. And within the fenced area, yes, they do reduce wildlife vehicle collisions significantly. And so if we have, it's often greater than 80%. And so if we have really good data to inform, like, okay, they're mostly crossing in a 3-mile area of roadway here. If the project can get community support and funding and all of the things, right, that are very important to have, just as important as good information, then maybe that's an option that we can move forward, right? And we can feel really confident that that is as good of as smart of an investment as we can make with the information that we have, right? It's not always going to be perfect. It's like any highway project, and I'm not going to speak for ITD, sure. But I mean, there's times I think where in places where we live, we've all observed things and they've been built, and it's like, well, maybe that didn't work as anticipated or whatever. Right. But oftentimes, we're seeing very high effectiveness where these projects are able to be implemented. And it's not just purely about, keeping animals from getting hit. There is a human safety component to that it's huge. And when we're talking about interstate highways and the speed at which we travel here in the West, it's 70, 80 miles an hour. And so anything that you hit bigger than a butterfly, there's potential, depending on how things play out after that initial collision, that could be a bad deal for all parties involved, right?
I dig. So that's something that, again, is informed off of the caller data that you guys collect. You can start making different decisions about traffic enhancements or things of that nature. Do you guys ever, you do tunnels too, right?
Yeah.
Tunnels seem like that's cheaper than an overpass, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. Well, in most cases. Little scary. You got to go into a dark tunnel. It's a little scary. Yeah. So there's another piece of information that if we're going down the highway route that's incredibly important, and that is, documented wildlife vehicle collisions. And so we put a lot of effort into getting that information in places where we believe it's beginning to approach an ecological significance. So the callers help us with the ecological significance part of it. But then as far as, justifying a project, the best way to do that is to go out there and do a structured survey where you have someone drive the road and count the roadside carcasses, right? And then there's other databases like crash data that ITD maintains, and we do that in partnership with our sister agency ITD. But yeah, that's kind of how we get there. And then on the underpasses front, yeah, they're an option. And there's a suite of options here, right? It's not just always got to be an overpass. The thing with underpasses is that of the species that we mentioned, mule deer, elk, moose, and pronghorn, pronghorn will not go under unless it is like a really big span bridge. They've been documented to go under. They just won't do it evolutionarily. So speed is their safety net, right? Sure. I am fast and I live in the open, and that's how I survive. And so convincing them, even with a fence, and knowing that they've got to get on the other side of the road, they won't go through a tunnel. They'll be like, nope, we're stopping here. We live over here now. And if we die because we can't get on the other side of the road, so be it. That tunnel's super scary. But yeah, in a lot of instances, the underpasses are a good solution, and oftentimes they can be more economical. So there are places in the state, like on Highway 28, south of Salmon. There's some bridges that were made a little wider there and some fencing that went in, and that's been very effective. We've documented many animals using that undercrossing, a lot of white-tailed deer and moose, but also some mule deer and elk. And then, one that is recently funded that has been publicized and has got a lot of community support and that will go to construction this summer is down south of Montpelier in southeast Idaho, in an area called Rocky Point. So ITD will be constructing 3 undercrossings there and associated fence. And that's to move the Bear Lake Plateau mule deer population safely across that roadway and reduce, there's a lot of corners there where you can come around the corner. And, when you talk about, depending on what level that mule deer population is at, we've got a 3 to 4 mile stretch there where the majority of 7 to 12,000 deer cross that road twice a year. So that's a place where it kind of starts to make sense. Like, we could minimize risk here to motorists and deer. And so that's how those conversations often start. But I can't emphasize enough, the community support piece of it is everything, right? We as a department are not going to advocate for something that it's pretty obvious that no one wants in their backyard. But if everybody thinks it's a good idea, then we're there to provide, the best available information that we have to inform the process and make sure that it's a smart investment.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Gotcha. I think I interrupted you guys going down like a rabbit hole of overpasses. Like traffic stuff.
Well, so we could, we'll talk about one other migration really quick. Let's talk, since we've talked about moose a little bit on this podcast, we have one moose migration mapped. Oh. And it's over it's in East Idaho. It's moose that winter in the Sand Creek Desert. So the largest wintering concentration of moose in a desert in the West. A lot of qualifiers there. But, we've got 400 to 600 moose that come into the Sand Creek Desert and winter. And so the department, obviously has been collecting data on that group of individuals to make sure that we've got good information to steward that population into the future. And what we're seeing is that it's pretty interesting. They go up to the higher elevations to summer. One bull in particular made a tremendous walk up into Montana. You can see him on the map. And then they come in the winter, especially if winters get more severe. Moose are big and they've got a lot of thermal density to them. But if winters get really severe out there in the desert, they can get pretty concentrated, and it's quite the sight to see. We only see it from a helicopter. There is a human entry closure on the public land out there that has been in place for a long time.
What's a human entry closure? Like, essentially you can't come in here?
Right. So you could, so it's closed to getting out of your car and walking around and or driving on the road. Now, if you own private land in there, you can still access your private land and do the things that you need to do. Sure. From a winter severity point, probably from right after Christmas to the end of February, even as a private landowner, you're looking for every reason that you can to not have to go in there.
Wait, what is the nature of the closure? Like, who determined that it was a closure?
So it has a long history, and it hasn't been smooth sailing, right? There's been people that have been like, well, why do we have a human entry closure out there at Sand Creek? And it all started with an agreement with the BLM for the Egan-Hamer Road, which is a roadway that goes out through there. And it's like, we'll permit this road to go across our properties, but one of the concerns is the impact of increased disturbance to wintering big game, because out in that landscape you've got 400 to 600 moose, you've got 4,000 to 7,000 deer depending on how robust that population is, and then you've got probably another 3,000 to 7,000 elk all in that same landscape. And so it was kind of decided that would be a good mitigation to try to make sure that those animals have the space to stay in the desert and not come into the agricultural interface and that all surrounds the Sand Creek Desert and cause problems.
So they're like, listen, man, there's a whole bunch of bowling pins over here. Don't go out there and knock them down because they're going to scatter. They're going to go into the different ag areas. You're going to create a whole slew of problems. Let them stay here. No pressure on them for hunting or recreational sightseeing. Just leave them alone and they won't come bother us and everything will be fine.
That's the intent. Yep.
Gotcha.
So you can still this closure goes into effect after hunting season, and typically once winter is starting to get pretty bad. So it's January 1.
Gotcha.
And then it goes to May 1.
Gotcha.
And the reason that it hangs on so late there is one of the things that we've learned is from an energetic standpoint, if you have a hard winter, that if you have a lot of disturbance late in the winter, so if animals are already kind of teetering on the edge of whether or not they're going to survive, you don't want to just go ahead and push them over the edge. So that's why the closure goes a little longer. I mean, sometimes we'll get comments like, well, does it have to be May 1? And some years, from a weather standpoint, like kind of like the winter we're having this year, maybe it doesn't have to go to May 1. And there have been times where there's been accommodations made where it's opened up earlier. But from an ease of managing and setting expectations standpoint, that's the expectations from January 1 to May 1. We're going to let those animals have the desert and keep them from coming into the human interface.
And there's when you're talking about late winter stress and like teetering on the edge, there's that relatively famous or well-known picture of like a bunch of mule deer. It was like 2016 or something, or 17, when there were a bunch of mule deer, really rough winter. They're all like on the verge of disaster. And then there was like a wolf pack that started chasing them around, and a bunch of them just dropped. They're like, I got nothing left. And they, again, were starving to death. And they did a bunch of necropsies, and they realized like, dude, their bone marrow was gone, like fat reserves gone. And they were just, again, at that late winter, just on the verge of spring. And then the stress of being chased around by predators who didn't even ultimately, consume them. It was like, they just had nothing left. It's one of the classic examples that people say that the wolves like hunt for fun and stuff and all of these things. But if you talk to a biologist, they're like, okay, yeah, there were wolves involved here, but you also had a population of animals that were at the end of their capacity to survive, because this is like, they had nothing left to run away. Like, this was a hyper unique situation, which is why it's only a picture from like 10 years ago. It's not like this happens every single year and you have all these animals that people can record with their iPhones. They're like, yeah, this was like a very unique situation where, bad winter, and they came into contact with predators, and, just that kind of chase led to fatalities.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that certainly can happen from an energetic standpoint. And one of the things that, I guess I'll mention briefly is it's interesting is that in a severe winter, there's a time where animals can reach basically the point of no return, let's say in late March.
Sure.
But they might not die until May or June. But energetically, physiologically, it had already been decided basically that in late March or early April that
you weren't going to make it.
You're not making it. And so they're just hanging on and they're dying.
God, dude, that's so rough. The world is so harsh for wild animals.
That's why when you see the ones that are still alive, anybody that's ever been elk hunting or whatever, when you go into a basin and you have the wind wrong and you bump a herd of elk and you watch them run further in 15 minutes than you can walk in a day, that's because natural selection's been working on them for a long time, and you got to be tough to make it.
Back when I was still an SAT tutor, I got into these big conversations with some of my some of my students are like, oh, hunting's so terrible. Like, whatever nonsense is rattling around a 16-year-old head who lives in that area. But I'm like, hey, man, what do you think happens if you just leave it alone? They're like, well, they live a happy life. I'm like, how do you think they die? Like, they're either starving to death, freezing to death, or being eaten alive. Like, and the point where they're getting eaten wasn't fun either, because they're getting chased to death. Like this is not a happy time for these animals. I'm not saying that, like we should be disrespectful of them or anything, but like the world is a really harsh place if you're a whitetail. Like this is it's not a great place to hang out. It's like, I'd rather be eating something and just boom, lights out. Yeah. That's just me though.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's rough. And so I guess just to close this out, and we're happy to talk about anything else you want to talk about, but one of the things I think folks will like to know is that once we have this information, we do use it to inform. So we talked about, highway mitigation type projects. We also use it to inform habitat related projects, like for example, cheatgrass treatments, sagebrush plantings. We know where maybe is a more important place to have a more robust response to a wildfire event, right? Like, okay, well, a significant portion of known mule deer winter range or if a migration route has burned, we need to put resources toward that. And so one of the other things I guess we should touch on too is when we say put resources to that, where this money comes from that funds everything we just talked about today. So it comes from two places. Well, it originates from one place, and that's hunter, angler, trapper dollars, right? That's who's paying the bill on this. So as an agency, the Department of Fish and Game doesn't get any general revenue funds, but the agency is fortunate that there's a good resource here, and that I think we do it responsibly, but we generate revenue to manage the resource from the sale of hunting, fishing, trapping licenses and affiliated permits and tags. And then that money that we make in the state, we're able to get that matched by what's called Pittman-Robertson dollars, which is from the Pittman-Robertson Act. And that's federal money that's collected from an excise tax on sporting goods related items, right? Which now with the growth of the recreational shooting community, they're also participating in that because that's how that was set up. So those folks are significantly funding the management of Idaho's wildlife too. But when we talk about put resources towards it, those are the resources we're talking about. We're talking about license revenue. I'll just broadly use license revenue, and then Pittman-Robertson dollars. Right. And that's been great that we, as that's the model of North American wildlife conservation. It's worked for a long time. We're in the East, they're hitting a point where the percentage of their public that, participates monetarily by purchasing tags and permits has, it's a little less than it used to be for a myriad of reasons. And so there's a lot of conversation about how do we adapt the North American model while still keeping true to the intent of the animals or for all the people of the state, but still have a good funding model to make sure that, there's economics are a real thing, right?
And there's sustainability
and
the whole thing. Right.
So we got to have, the economics to support the populations. And so, yeah.
Okay. Let's do this. I have to call it right now, which is very unfortunate. I should have allotted like 2 or 3 hours for you guys because I have a lot of questions specifically about environmental management and other things that, obviously we're talking about, but let's do this. Please come back. I love hearing these things. As a person, I don't have access to this data. Like I don't hang out with a bunch of wildlife biologists and I don't work for Fish and Game. So I don't know the things you guys do. So when I get to hear these things like, okay, this is great, especially knowing these are where funds are going. And by the way, if we don't have people out there looking at this stuff and, again, being funded by people that engage in this largely, like I have by hunting licenses and whatnot because of the Dingle Johnson and Pittman Robertson, right? Those are the two, because I want to keep supporting wildlife, right? Both for recreation and, hopefully hunting in the very, very near future. So again, important to know where those dollars are going. But I really appreciate you guys. Thank you for coming on. Anything you want to say here at the end? And again, please come back. But, we don't have to solve everything in one conversation.
No, thanks for having us.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for bringing in all the gear and we'll do it again.
Okay.
Okay.